Isn't the ending to Age of Calamity great? The bad guys are defeated, and all of our heroes are alive and happy with their adorable little egg robot. Everything is bright and wonderful. Here, let me ruin that for you. I'm Cornelius Belmont, and let's talk about the Age of Calamity consequences. Thanks for joining me. Please like and subscribe. Special thanks to these supporters. Let's get into it. Previously I talked about how Terraco created a time split when they went back in time. And in that split, they went dormant in Hyrule Field for about 9 years. During that time, Malice corrupted the Terraco of the past, making it into the Harbinger, and it ran around Hyrule setting up the conflict that we would see throughout the game. Understanding the nature of that time split, and the ultimate destination of it is what we first need to explore. Thanks to the events presented in Age of Calamity, the Breath of the Wild timeline now has 3 branching paths in it. You heard me correctly, 3 branching paths. Because of that, there are a lot of interesting things to digest here. Let's get started. These 3 outcomes I'm going to name as Future A, B, and C. I will first touch on the one that we are all familiar with, Future A, which are the events that we play through in Breath of the Wild. I'll try to keep this one brief since most people have played through the game at this point, but there are some events here that need to be brought up due to their inclusion in Age of Calamity. The Calamity erupts, corrupting the Guardians. The champions rush off to their Divine Beast, which after they are piloting them, gets assaulted by the Blight Ganons, leading to their deaths. Link and Zelda end up at the Battle of Hateno Field, where Link falls and Zelda's powers awaken. Link is then taken to the Shrine of Resurrection while Zelda swings by the Korok Forest. After returning the Master Sword to its pedestal, she heads to Hyrule Castle. Link wakes up 100 years later, and with some guidance, frees the 4 Divine Beasts, making 4 valuable allies in the process. Prince Sidon, Unopal, Teba, and Riju, the 4 of whom I'm going to collectively call the new champions. What I've laid out here is the undisputed canon of Breath of the Wild, and what I am now labeling as Future A. The first time split happens during the Battle of Hateno Field. Terraco awakens and travels back in time about 10 years with Malice chasing them. It is this action of temporal disruption that causes a split, because any new actions added to the past would ripple forward through the rest of the events, in a concept known as the butterfly effect. Let's now address the endpoint of this split had no more time travel occurred. The settlements are on high alert due to constant monster attacks, and in general, things are lagging behind what we see in Breath of the Wild. It is only with the discovery of Terraco that the kingdom is able to start making headway on the impending disaster. Pilots are recruited, the hero is discovered, and in general things start to catch up to where they were in the other timeline. However, despite their best efforts, the Calamity still erupted before Zelda could unlock her powers, leading to an outcome very similar to the events of Future A. The Divine Beast get corrupted, the champions would again die, Link would fall in Hateno Field, and Zelda would end up fighting for 100 years in the castle while he recovered. Link would then awaken, would meet up with his past allies, gain the Master Sword, and with help from the new champions, free the Divine Beast. He would then overcome the Calamity at Hyrule Castle, just like what we saw in Future A. We know this would be the outcome because of what we see in Age of Calamity. In order to save the past champions, Terraco would open portals to the new champions in this bad future, allowing them to come back in time as reinforcements, giving each of their past counterparts enough support for Link to come in and save the day. This change would lead to Future C. But before we get into that, we need to discuss why Terraco was reaching into this timeline's future to grab the future champions, and not back and around the corner into Future A. When time travel occurs, it happens going back or forward along a chain of events leading to that moment in time. In other words, you can rewind and fast forward, but you can't change lanes. Because Terraco is on a different track, It could use a time portal to go forward and backwards based on the current position, but it could not go into a different timeline. That would be something known as quantum tunneling, and a topic I will not be talking about here. In order for Terrako to jump into another timeline, which might not actually be doable at all, they would need to at a minimum jump back to the point in which they first time traveled. Assuming then that Terrako could somehow deal with the malice that followed them back in time, it would then be able to reach forward into Future A and grab the future champions. But at that point they would have sealed themselves off from Future B. In short, the new champions that we see in Age of Calamity cannot be the same heroes we see in Future A. And so it makes more sense for Terrako to reach forward in their current placement into Future B and pull those champions back in time. Then of course, the act of pulling them back inevitably creates another time split where their immediate actions change the course of events again. And that leads us to the future champions show up helping the past champions, and that gives Link the time he needs to save each one of them. With the Divine Beast back under their control, they are able to fight off the hordes of monsters and corrupted Sheikah Guardians. This allows Link, Zelda, and Impa to make their way to Hateno Field, where, similar to what we saw before, Zelda's powers awaken. From there, they coordinate at the Great Plateau, and launch a unified assault on Hyrule Castle. After many battles and confrontations, they would confront the completed Calamity and seal it away, but not without a major casualty. Terrako, having been infected with malice and gravely damaged, would sacrifice itself against Calamity Ganon so the heroes could seal it. The heroes rejoice in victory as they have overcome the conflict, but shortly after, the future champions fade away, believing that they are returning to their homes. That, however, is not the case. Remember that time travel can only happen on a linear path, and that the actions of the new champions being pulled to the past change the course of events. That means that they are now on a different path themselves and cannot simply fast forward to their future. If they did, they would move forward on this timeline, and thus they would end up about 100 years forward into Future C, where presumably a less tragic copy of themselves would exist. As you can imagine, that would be a big mess on its own. Not to mention that Future B, where they came from, would be completely stripped of their new champions, one of which is the head prince of the Zora, and another being the reigning chief of the Gerudo. Worse yet, is that if the events of Breath of the Wild 2 requires the new champions in some capacity, Future B lacking those champions may end up in a predicament where the events of Breath of the Wild 2 are doomed to failure. Even still, considering the fate of these new champions, this is a more optimistic outlook and happy result than what logically happened at the end of Age of Calamity. You see, Terrako was destroyed in the final battle. Minutes later, literally minutes later, the new champions start to fade away. Previously, they traveled back through a portal, and earlier we saw Terrako travel through a portal. So you would think that the time travel done through Terrako requires just that, a portal. Instead, we see the new champions mysteriously begin to fade away. Everyone assumes that they are just returning to their own time, but hopefully you can see with everything that I've laid out here, that simply isn't the case. They are not returning to their own time, they are actually fading out of existence. Likely because Terrako is unable to sustain their existence here any longer. In various time travel media, we see instances where a temporal device is keeping a time travel anchored to a specific point in time. And often, if that device is broken, that character is ripped back to wherever they came from. In this instance, Terrako would be that device. Most time travel narratives, however, operate on the idea that there is a single timeline that is reconstructing itself with changes done in the past. And so when a time traveler is removed like this, they often reappear in a new reconstructed future that they came from. However, the Zelda series infamously operates off timeline splits. And so again, the best case scenario is that these new champions would be ripped forward into Future C, though they might fade from existence entirely. The idea that the new champions fade away into non-existence is pretty grim, but one question remains. As we all know, Zelda has time powers. The bloodline of Hylia has given her the means to manipulate time, and that is because Hylia herself was a time goddess. It also appears that this is the very thing allowing Terrako to open time portals. If Zelda had a better understanding of her powers, it seems feasible that she could have stopped the new champions from fading away. The fact remains that this Zelda seems to be completely unaware of the actual power at her disposal, other than that she is able to produce devastating waves of light capable of eradicating malice. The end result of all of this is that they end up in a course of events that lead them to believe they have a happy ending where Hyrule is saved, with our heroes being completely ignorant that they robbed another timeline of their future champions. Considering that they may not even understand their own time travel mechanics, that might seem okay, as they might believe that their changes to the past are rewriting the timeline entirely, and are completely ignorant of the branches they are creating along the way. I'll touch on the ethics behind that mindset at some other time though. At the start of Age of Calamity, Terrako creates a time portal and jumps back in time about 10 years. Malice follows them, which infects the past version of Terrako, all while the time-traveling Terrako goes dormant in Hyrule Field. With the Harbinger running around, events in the timeline deviate, creating the first timeline split. Events in this timeline continue with our heroes gaining ground against the forces of the Calamity, but ultimately they come up short. As the Calamity erupts, the Divine Beasts are corrupted just like they were in Breath of the Wild, and the events are on track to being similar to what we see at the end of that game. This is Future B, the bad future. After absorbing some goddess power from Zelda, Terrako splits the timeline by reaching forward into Future B and calling back the future champions from there. With their intervention, they are able to hold off the Blight Ganons long enough for Link to arrive and save all of their lives. This alteration to the timeline, however, has caused a new split away from Future B into Future C, the good future. With the champions alive and the Divine Beast under their control, the heroes are able to make a unified assault against the Calamity. At the heart of the castle, they defeat it, but only due to Terrako sacrificing themselves in the process. Shortly after the battle, the new champions pulled from Future B begin to fade away, to what our heroes assume is back to their original times. However, based on the time travel logic used in both Age of Calamity and the Zelda series as a whole, returning to Future B would be impossible without more time travel manipulation. As such, they either end up in Future C, where there is another copy of them, or fade from existence entirely. Meanwhile, in Future B, the new champions mysteriously vanish, never to be seen again. Thank you guys for watching the episode. For the time being, I'm going to continue to focus on Zelda theories, but I'm beginning to plan out some Square Enix related theories for the future. If you enjoy my content, please give the video a like and subscribe. That would really mean a lot to me, and it helps the channel grow. See you next time. This is Cornelius Belmont signing out.